G'day guys and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast, powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and today guys, I've got a bit of a different episode for you, and it's something that I'm actually very excited about. We've got a special guest on the show. Some of you may have heard her before, maybe heard her on a different podcast, her own podcast as well. But I have a lot of you guys that have written in, asking about savings and how do I, stuck on savings, can't save this, can't save that. I need to try and level this thing up. And I'm excited because I've got the queen of savings in here and also being able to do things like negotiating, wage increase, all these different things, all the things that will help you get into your first property or help you save more and fast track your property investment goals. So I'm very excited to welcome Miss Queenie Tan into the studio. How are you, Queenie?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
No worries at all. Now, you are a host, obviously, of your own nice big podcast out there as well. I Invest with Queenie and your lovely partner, Pablo, as well. He's a good fella. How's that going for you guys?
Yeah, it's going well. We're lucky enough to be able to do it full time, which is just amazing. So, yeah, very grateful for everybody who listens. And, it's been a really fun journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I've noticed when I was, look at you guys, a bit of stuff here and there as we go over time as well. And it's cool because you built like a really big following around almost like everything, right? Like travel hacks, budgeting hacks, different things you can kind of do. And I think especially when you're starting out and lower income earners, which we do have a lot of lower income earners on this, as listeners as well, getting those little hacks that allow you to save your extra, however much it is a week, which will compound monthly and then annually as well. Even if it takes you 2 to 3 years to save your first deposit, all these little hacks are very, very important to kind of getting to that next level. And there's a few juicy ones you were telling me about off air as well, even around wages and salaries and whatnot as well. So I'm really excited to unpack some of that as well.
Me too. I'm so excited.
Perfect. To kick off, I would love to hear a bit of your own story, backstory, a bit of origins with yourself and kind of how you and Pablo kind of got into this stuff. And if you wouldn't mind sharing the backstory on how you guys started investing.
Of course. So I guess it kind of goes back to my childhood because I feel like money has always been something that I've been really curious about. Because I was raised by a single stay-at-home dad.
Okay.
And he actually didn't have a job, which was really interesting because a lot of people at school would ask me, what do your parents do for a living or what do your parents do? And I would always say, oh, my dad doesn't have a job. He's retired actually. And I was just curious, like how was he able to afford our lifestyle while not working? And it was because of passive income. So he actually used to be an engineer for Sydney Water. And he was able to save up money on the side, while he was working. He bought a couple of properties and then was able to make some passive income. Mind you, it wasn't like a crazy lifestyle. We didn't live in like...
in Ferraris.
There were no Ferraris. I went to public schools, didn't live in like fancy areas or anything like that. And we didn't really take any holidays like overseas and things like that. So it was very like kind of humble lifestyle, but he didn't have to work and he was always able to pick me up from school and take me to places. So I was like, this money world is really interesting, because I feel like a lot of people, we get brought up and we think that, there's one path to live, you have to work until you die essentially. But yeah, there are so many different ways that you can build wealth and have freedom in your life, which I think is just amazing. So yeah, I've always been curious about that. I love working. So I got my first job at 14 at Macca's.
Yeah, right.
And have been like, trying to pursue my own version of financial independence ever since. But yeah, it's a really interesting journey.
Can I ask out of curiosity, at what age did your dad retire? Like at what age had he retired himself? And from property, that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, so he was around 45.
Okay.
And he basically had, like, it wasn't like a crazy amount of like properties or anything. It was basically like one shop which we received rent from that was able to fund our lifestyle. So it wasn't like a crazy amount of passive income, but it was enough to pay for bills and everything. So yeah, I think it's amazing that whatever you want to do in your life, like whatever lifestyle you want to have, like there is a way that you can essentially make passive income to give yourself a bit more freedom, and 100%. Be able to maybe even work part-time if you don't want to work full-time anymore, or potentially even retire early if you want to. Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
That is really cool. I think the thing that I really love out of that as well is a lot of people think when you're trying to create passive income, it has to be $200, $300, $500,000, like some crazy number, right? And what it sounds like is your dad wanted to create enough and had created enough so that he could be a stay-at-home dad and kind of, you know, raise you guys as well. And that property, that one, it sounds like the one shop in particular, provided enough that he could still do that and kind of live that lifestyle, which is the passive income that he wanted to give him the results or the goal, you know, give him that goal from that end as well. So I actually love that. Like it doesn't need to be something crazy. It's suited his lifestyle and what he was trying to do. So I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like you can kind of get caught up in that, you know, more is more kind of trap. And, you know, you just keep on working so that you can fund more expensive lifestyle things, but doesn't necessarily make you happy. Like, you know, sometimes I think, you know, it's good to work out what's enough for you and, you know, and still live a nice life.
I think that's a funny point you make there too, hey, because like there's so many people, they live within their means. So if they make 50 grand a year, they can live on 50 grand. They make 100 grand a year, they'll live on 100. They make 200, they'll live on 200. Like it's not, there is a small minority that will kind of pull it apart and do something different with it and say invest it like we're about to talk about. But it's funny, hey, how like people will, and it's all good when you're creating goals and let's say you do want a really lavish lifestyle and you shoot for $200,000-$300,000, something like that. But I find it funny when looking at a lot of people and they make 200 and they'll spend 200, you know, just because it's what they make. They're kind of living within what they make, or sometimes it's more, you know. So it's, yeah, I think it's a funny thing to kind of look at that and put it in perspective as well, hey.
Yeah, it really is. I guess it just depends on, you know, what you want your lifestyle to look like. And you can always trial and error it, you know, like there might be some things that you want to splash out on, some things that, you know, you'd be happy to maybe cut back on so you can spend more in other areas. It's, it's really cool, like the different paths you can go down.
Yeah, 100%. All right, I'm curious, right? And obviously, you invest in a different asset class to what we do. You have your own home. I'd love to dive into that into a second as well. But I know you're very, you know, pro stocks and shares and everything, and that's what you invest in, and that's cool. Obviously, like if someone is creating wealth, I personally don't care what anyone works in and tries to create their wealth in. If that's how they know how to make wealth, I think that's cool, and hats off to you guys for that as well. What I'd really love to unpack though is like what got you into the investing methodology of, and I know obviously it was your dad, but like what was then the trigger of when you started doing it, and what was sort of the changes or the hacks that you started learning along this journey as well?
Oh, okay. So what got me into investing was essentially, you know, working from the age of 14 up until I think at the time I was 23. I was working in a fintech startup. And I was earning the most money that I've ever made in my life. I was on like $120,000.
How old were you?
I was 23, and I was like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm like really happy with this. But I remember there was this all hands meeting at the company I was working for, and this was just during the pandemic, and they had laid off 20% of like our staff, and thankfully I wasn't one of them. But I felt so guilty for still being there and like being in that position, because I knew how difficult it was. Like when, you know, early on in my career, I moved out of home at 19. It was like a real struggle just to make ends meet. And I kind of like, I don't know, I just went through this phase where I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so lucky, but also I feel guilty. And I feel like, you know, I don't know if I really want to do this whole working thing forever, because it can be really challenging. And especially when you give your heart and soul to a company and, you know, you get let go, or, you know, your friends get let go, it can be really challenging mentally. And I guess I realized that, you know, maybe this isn't something that I really want to keep on doing forever. And I do want to be able to have some freedom in my life where I have some assets built up in the background where I can just kind of like leave jobs if I need to. And I was grateful even at the age of 23, I had a bit of that, you know, I had savings.
120 grand a year is good money as well.
Yeah, I had savings. I had bought my own home, and, you know, even if I did get let go, I knew I had some money to rely on. But I kind of, in the back of my mind, I was like, it would be really cool if I was like completely self-reliant and I didn't really have to rely on like any job or anything, and I could just pick and choose the things that I really wanted to do. So yeah, I guess that was like a big wake-up call for me, like that kind of experience working at that company, realizing, you know, we're all essentially replaceable.
100%.
And then wanting to be able to build my own, I guess, like freedom and a lifestyle where I didn't have to work for money. I could work because I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And
Okay, cool. So the idea it's like security. Yeah, sounds like a security is the big thing. Where like even if you did get laid off, it's like, all right, no worries, Pablo, let's go back to France, man. Let's go for 6 months and enjoy. You know, that's the security side of things, right?
Exactly.
That's cool. That's cool. So So you'd already bought your primary residence at that point as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think that experience was really, when I look back now, I was saving about from the age of 19 when I had first moved out of home. And it was such a struggle because I was only earning $400 a week and I had to pay for rent. And, I was also at uni at the time. So like textbooks are really expensive, transport going to uni and back. And then I also had 2 part-time jobs on the side to make money. And it was like, I just remember living so frugally. It was not enough money to live on. And just being very stressed financially. And then I guess over time, like making more money enabled me to put away more money to save. Yeah. And that was around the time that I met Pablo and we started saving together to buy our first home. So we had this goal of saving our first $100,000. It took us around 4 years to save that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it took quite a while. But when we eventually did, we were able to buy our first home, which is a 2-bedroom apartment. It was like very dodgy looking. there were like cupboards falling off the hinges. The oven didn't even work. And, but yeah, it was a start. We renovated the apartment and it has been a good investment since, which is pretty good.
That's good.
Yeah, we're happy that, I think that it can be really difficult when you are starting out and especially like, you look at property prices and like getting to your first 100,000, you think you'll never get there, but I guess step by step,
What do you think were the biggest things like saving through to do that? Like saving 100 grand, it sounds like you were on a very, very low income at the time as well. What do you think were the biggest sort of saving things? Because you were living out of home renting with Pablo and you were out there obviously saving money to get into this first. 100 grand is a fair bit to save if you're on a lower income to save that much. Like what were the biggest things? You had the expenses in there as well. You still got to live. Like you can't be eating baked beans every night on the couch. Like what were you? Were you eating baked beans on the couch every night?
I kind of was at the beginning,
right, okay.
But I feel like looking back, I'm like, I kind of wish I didn't go so frugal back in those days. Yeah. But I guess you do what you got to do, right? I think looking back now, at the time I was like trying to save as much as I could. But when you're on a low income, it's really difficult to save because, there's only so much you can save. You can only really save 100% of your income. Like that's the max. So if you really want to save, and what I would say to myself looking back now is try to find ways to increase your income, which is what I eventually learned because there are only so many things that you can cut out of your lifestyle before, you just can't possibly. So what I started to do was learning how to increase my income. So what I would do was I was pretty ruthless at the jobs that I was working for. So if I didn't get a pay rise within 1 to 2 years, and, I would always keep tabs on like how much my skills were going for at different companies and essentially just like switching jobs every 1 to 2 years. I think that the biggest thing that people can do to kind of like increase their savings rate or increase their income is essentially just finding ways to increase their income. There are these crazy stats if you actually start to look into the loyalty tax. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before.
Yeah, I know where you're going with it. But please, for the listeners that haven't, give us a breakdown. Loyalty tax.
It's so interesting. So essentially, new employees are paid on average 7% more than existing employees doing the exact same job. So you would think that, a lot of companies would pay...
reward the people who've been there for longer.
Yeah, but a lot of companies don't, unfortunately.
Yep.
So and they've actually done studies on this. So people that change jobs more frequently earn 50% more over their lifetimes than people who stay in the same job for long periods of time.
That's massive.
So that 7%, it really compounds over time. Yep. So I would say if you're working in a company, you haven't gotten a pay rise in more than a couple of years, maybe it's time to look out there for a better offer. And if you can earn it, like saving an extra $10,000 per year, you can do that. I think it works out to like $27.40 per day. You can stop buying the coffees. You can stop buying, your lunches out. But there's only so much you can do. Yeah. But like getting a pay rise of $10,000.
That's significant.
It's significant. And I feel like it's also a lot more achievable, and you don't even need to sacrifice your lifestyle that much.
Very true.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point because one of the things I'm a very big advocate on this show of is you can't save your way to retirement, right? Like you have to invest. And the way I'm looking at this and hearing this is it's almost like the other version of not saving your way to retirement and actually investing to be able to get there. But essentially what you're doing is you're investing and getting a higher returning on your time, because that's the only thing we can trade for, right? At this point, when you're building your portfolio, when you're investing, serviceability is huge, deposits are huge, especially in the early days. It's very, very crucial. So yeah, you like one of your biggest tips there is actually go out and hunting hard. And so you're talking, if someone's not willing to give you a pay rise and you know you're worth more, which again, we always talk about knowing your worth and going for more, you would swap jobs.
Yeah, I would.
Did you used to use it as a negotiation tactic to try and get the pay increase first?
I would.
Yep.
I would. And,
Would you mind talking us through, like, I guess the way you do that as well? Because we talk about it a lot, but I've never had anyone jump on and be willing to kind of like break down the way they would negotiate that. Because I know we've got a lot of clients on here that struggle with this. It's almost like a little bit of a sticking point, and they probably are paying the loyalty tax of not pushing harder with this or jumping. So I'd love for you to, I guess, break down a little bit around how you used to do it and how you would recommend people do it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the early days, I was just grateful to have a job, any job. But then after a while, you kind of learn that, hey, look, if the business is making money, if you're making more money for the business, like you are entitled to ask for more. And there's nothing wrong with asking for more as well, especially if you feel like you do deserve it and you have put in the hard yards to actually, help the company make more money.
100%.
So essentially what I would do is I would prep my boss a couple of months in advance, maybe say, hey, look, I'm looking to increase my salary this year. I would love to know what would set me up in the best position to be able to negotiate a higher salary. And I think by prepping them a few months in advance, they're not like shocked the day that you ask them for a pay rise. And at least you can start putting in
planting that seed very early.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Putting in the legwork so that you can do activities that will put you in the best position to get that pay rise. But sometimes, I guess, for whatever reason, maybe the company's not in the position to give you the pay that you're after. In those cases, just have a look at what other roles are paying, and that's what I would essentially do. That was my method, and it worked pretty well. Even though it can be really awkward negotiating pay rises, I feel like prepping your boss in advance is probably the best way to do it. Yeah,
I agree there. And I think one of the cool things too is I think if you are genuinely worth what you're about to ask for, they know that you're worth that anyway. And to replace replacing in itself is an expense that they would have to go through. But if you're really good at what you do and you are worth what you're going to ask for, I think it's a great way. And preempting it, planting the seed with that is mad. It's funny because like so often I never really thought of it like that's a great idea, because like what I used to do, I just go in and just go. And it was kind of like when enough was enough, and when the straw broke the camel's back, and I went in and like a gorilla, I need this pay rise or I'm leaving sort of thing. But planting the seed like that is actually like a really strategic way of doing it. And then being cutthroat if they're not giving you what you want or what you believe you're worth and what the market is telling you you're worth in terms of what other jobs are going for, then being cutthroat with that and keep moving. And I love that, especially from a property investment perspective, because when you jump jobs, you can lose serviceability for a little bit, but if you're in the same industry, a lot of the time, especially your mainstream banks will actually honor that side of things. If they'll make you go past probation, which is generally your 3 months. But then if you've got a $10,000 pay increase, or it could be more, that's significant from a borrowing perspective as well. And obviously from a savings perspective too. So I think it's really cool. That's a really, really sound piece of advice. I think a lot of people can action it, unless you work at Australian Property Scout. Don't come ask me.
Yeah, it's so true. And even like side hustles as well. Like I feel like building up some sort of like side income or side income stream can be a really great way to earn money as well. So that's something I would also do. I would do freelance work on the side on weekends after work, and that can also help you get to your deposit a lot faster. Yep. So and just to kind of hone in a little bit on that as well, when you're talking side hustles, you're kind of talking anything, right? Anything you can do for a second job from that perspective. Or even, I think, well, this is how this started for you, right? Is kind of you and Pablo kind of started this on the side during COVID as just a bit of was it a way to kill time, or it was always the intention to turn it into a business, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah. So at the time, it was a bit of fun, and I felt super passionate about it because I've always been really, really passionate about money and investing and getting ahead. And I also wanted to, find a way to kind of like share all the things that we were learning. And in the back of my mind, I thought it would be so cool if this could be a job one day. But I also thought, realistically, how likely is that? Maybe it'll take like 5 years, 10 years or something before that could happen. But I was surprised that, we were able to actually be able to leave our jobs within 2 years, which is pretty cool. And I feel very, very grateful for, this opportunity that I've been given. But I also feel like there are so many opportunities these days for young people in business and online and creating their own businesses, because I feel like I was listening to this podcast the other day and I thought it was so true. In the podcast, this person...
Was that the Scouting Australia podcast?
Yes. I love your podcast too. I love all the podcasts.
I'm joking.
Yeah. But
sorry to cut you off.
No. By all means. It was so interesting. So they were saying how the baby boomers, they were really able to accelerate their wealth through, buying their primary home of residence and just keeping it for like many, many, many years. And they built like massive properties. But these days, like young people have technology and they can start these really, really low cost businesses from their bedrooms and scale them up into massive businesses. And I'm like, yeah, that's very true. Like there are so many opportunities to make money for young people these days. And I feel like, if you listen to all of the doom and gloom in the world, like they'll tell you that, it's impossible to get ahead, but there are so many opportunities to make money. You just got to find them, right?
I couldn't agree more. I feel like one of the other cool things is even if it was something you're passionate about and you can make it a side hustle, or even if you're needing to get into a second job, which might be, I don't know, Bunnings or Macca's, for a bit of money, whatever it is, especially if we're talking younger, lower income earners. But that allows them to get into a property sooner, maybe 12 months, 6 months quicker than what they otherwise would have been able to do. And then their passion is potentially property, or they want to like get into property and investing, all the rest of it. That's like that leg up, and almost like the property investing then becomes a side hustle, but the second job funds them in, because that's what it was for me. I made significantly more money out of investing than I ever did as a PAYG income earner. And the longer you do it, the more it compounds and gets bigger and better, as you know. So I love that. I love the idea of kind of pushing hard from that perspective as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, love it.
Beautiful. The next thing that I kind of wanted to dive into is I wanted to talk about sacrifice, right? And you've got a very big following online, Instagram in particular, and a lot of your stuff is around kind of hacks and tips and tricks and all the rest of it from all different things. We're talking, travel, saving hacks, again, this sort of stuff that we're just talking about now as well. But you've got an interesting one that we were chatting about just before we jumped in here as well, and you're talking about like the 50-30-20 rule, right? And when it comes to sacrifice, I love this as a rule when you were explaining it before, because it kind of puts things into perspective. Some people think they need to like save everything. And that's what I was like for like the 7 years when I was like 20-ish, 21 or something through to 28. And I still enjoyed myself, still had a good time. But like, I feel like I put so much pressure on myself to save as much as I could. But I love your 50-30-20 rule. Do you want to run the listeners through how that works and how you implemented that as well?
Yeah, of course. I think it's a very simple formula. Mm-hmm. So 50-30-20. So 50% of your income goes towards your needs. So all of your necessities like your rent or your mortgage, groceries, things like that, everything that you need to live.
Yep.
30% goes to the fun stuff. So travel, eating out, buying coffees, like whatever you love spending money on.
Discretionary money, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then 20% goes towards your savings or investments, so your long-term goals. And I find that it's a very simple rule, but when I reflect back on my life, I had these times when I was super frugal as well, like you, where I was not spending enough money in the fun department. Like I literally, my life was very sad. It was like very basic, and looking back at those times, I kind of wish, I would have spent more money on the fun stuff. Yeah. And then there were also times when I went way overboard and I spent way too much money on the fun stuff and I was not getting ahead with my savings and investments. And I kind of had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like you're not really getting ahead financially. You're not really getting ahead with your money. So I feel like that 50-30-20 budget, it's like, it really is like a perfect rule because you can still have fun.
Yeah.
You're still making progress towards your goals and it feels like everything's in alignment. So yeah, it's a simple budgeting strategy, but highly recommend it. I think it does work quite well.
I like it as a balance. Like, I think it's really good. And the reason why I brought up sacrifice before we went into it as well is I know a lot of people used to run off like a 10% rule, like always pay yourself first, pay yourself 10%. But I feel like these days, like 10% it's not enough to get anywhere. Like if you're making 80, 100 grand a year, average Australian incomes, like you're talking $8,000 to $10,000 a year. If you're saving for your first deposit, we're talking like 5 years to save your first deposit. Whereas if we're kind of doubling down on that, even if you're starting from scratch, we start talking, 16 to 20 grand a year sort of thing. All of a sudden that starts moving substantially closer. And there's a lot of people out there that might go, oh, well, that's a lot. Like 20% is a lot to save on that front. But the reason I bring up sacrifice is because like things like this, they aren't built overnight. Creating substantial wealth isn't built overnight. It also isn't built without having a level of sacrifice and putting something significant together like this as well. So the reason I love this is it's kind of like it's a strategy and still pay yourself first, but maybe look at upping it, getting it to a level that's actually going to move you closer to your goals and faster towards it. Because when you said the 50, 30, 20 and you explained it to me outside, I knew what that 20 was going to be. And I'm like, that's cool because it's bigger than most people think. And I like it as a strategy from that side. It will help move a lot of people, I think, towards getting towards a first property, or it might be helping chip in towards a second or third deal as they're building this thing as well. The other cool thing to put into perspective, guys, is when you run off a ratio like this as well at 20% or bigger, the banks are going to look at it as you save more money. You're not as flippant with your money. You're more frugal with it from that perspective. Well, that also is going to increase your serviceability, which is obviously crucial to your investing as well. So I love it. Yeah, when you're explaining to me out there, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. So that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. And you can even flip the 20 and the 30.
Yeah.
So you could do like 30% savings investments, 20% to the fun stuff. So yeah, I think it is a good rule.
So we're probably that comes down to the season. So maybe in the winter, flip it to the 20, 30s, flip it around.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you want to get there quicker and you want to push it a little bit harder, I think that's a great rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we've touched on a few things here in terms of like the biggest and best sort of saving hacks. If you were to give us like a bit of a round out of like what were your biggest takeaways, you do so much this sort of stuff. If you were to give me say your 5 best, we've negotiated on the wage, we've got the salaries up, but the 5 best things as saving hacks that you see most people make the mistake on and they're costing themselves too much daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. What would be if you got 5 minimum? If you got any more, that'd be great. That would be your picks that you see most people make mistakes on.
Okay, so I think some of the one that comes to mind that's the most obvious is a high interest savings account.
Okay.
There are so many high interest savings account. You can literally like park your money while you're saving for your first home. And these days they give you like 5% interest on your money and that's paid out monthly, which is just amazing.
Yep.
So I think if you're not already with a high interest savings account, highly recommend it. There are so many different ones out there. I think some really good ones are ING. There's a Macquarie Saver that's really good as well, and UBank.
Okay.
But it all depends on like what your lifestyle is. Like if you can meet those minimum, usually they have criteria so that you can meet the bonus interest rate. So definitely have a look at the fine print, make sure you can meet all those criteria. So yeah, that would be the first one.
I think it's a great one. And you know what's a great point is sometimes it's the simple things that people overlook, but the compounding effect of savings is the same with obviously property growth and how everything moves it. But you've got to remember, like you're like most people out there at a smaller scale, especially if they're first starting out. And yeah, if this is like pre first property, that high interest savings account. And the reason why I laugh about this is I never had one. It was folly. Like for me not to have one when I was trying to save for my first deposit, it was idiocy. But I think it's like the simple things that people overlook that can compound. And if you're saving this thing for 2 years, it could be another extra couple of grand that gets you into that thing or more. So I love that. It's good, simple, easy one. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. There are also some really amazing first home buyer initiatives. So one is the First Home Buyer Super Saver Scheme, which is just amazing. So essentially what you can do now is you can essentially go to your employer and say, hey, I would like to salary sacrifice, let's say like an extra $10,000 into my super. You can later withdraw these extra salary sacrifice super contributions to buy your first home.
Yep.
You can release up to $50,000. And the reason why this one could be a good strategy is because super is only taxed at 15%, whereas like most of our marginal tax rates are from 30 up to 45%.
Yep.
So you're essentially saving quite a bit of money on tax. And even when you withdraw these extra super salary sacrifice contributions, they even give you a bit of a tax break. So you still need to pay a bit of tax back on like the
when you pull it out.
Yeah, but they give you a 30% tax break. So there are these calculators that you can look at, and it actually does work out better than a regular savings account. So that's a really cool one. There's also stamp duty exemptions. So depending on which state you live in, you can get stamp duty exemptions on your first home. Yeah, there are just so many like amazing schemes out there, and I honestly wish I knew about them sooner.
100%. I got to agree. I'm going to agree, and I hope you don't mind disagree a little,
Yeah.
but it's purely because we're predominantly an investing podcast, right? But the caveat on that is I needed that for my first one. So for me, in the location that I was, which was, I was in Sydney, I bought my first place in Wollongong. If I didn't have the 10 grand grant and the stamp duty exemption at the time, I never would have been able to get into that property. But I was lucky because it was my first deal. I kind of fluked a location at the time. If I was to try and buy that same property now, I'd probably be buying it at the top. And while the grants would help me, it probably wouldn't be the best investment. But I think like while I agree and disagree is if you're in the right location where this could benefit you as well, like maybe you're in wherever you are in the country at the moment, if your area where you live stacks up from an investing perspective, and we've done this for a couple of clients that have actually come in and they might have been in Brisbane or Adelaide or Perth or something like that. And we've actually been able to help and use their first homeowner grant benefits and stamp duty exemptions to help them get into their first deal. But it's still an investment grade property, but they were able to do it and then live in it for the first 6 or 12 months or whatever was required. But they bought a really good deal in the right location. So they didn't buy somewhere where they maybe wanted to live in the city. They bought in the best location for growth, and they bought at the right price. They made money on the way in. So I think it's like it's one of those things where if it can work in your favor, maybe if you're living in Sydney or Melbourne, maybe it's a bit too expensive and too hard to find the right deal in that location. But if you're in one of these other locations where it could help, it can definitely be a leg up in the door, especially if we're talking about first deal. It can really, if it can really help you get in from that, and like it did for me, I think it's a really great and helpful thing, for some people.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, it depends on the location that you want to buy. But yeah, definitely can work for some people. And my last one would be using credit cards wisely. So I think that it's just a really fascinating area. Essentially, what a lot of people don't know is you can essentially like get a credit card, use it for your daily expenses, but then if you pay back every single thing that you owe in full and on time every single month, you don't have any debt with it. You essentially don't have to pay any interest, and you can accumulate points. And this has been such a great savings hack for me because 2 years ago, I actually did a round the world trip just from using my points.
No way.
I saved around $10,000
Did you take
on
Pablo
flights.
or did you leave him?
Yeah, I took Pablo, of course. It was amazing. And being able to fly like business class around the world.
Really?
Like with
Just on points?
Yeah,
Wow.
saving like $10,000. It's been such a great strategy. But yeah, we always make sure we pay back everything that we owe in full on time. And also when we were buying our first home, we did also like reduce the credit limit on our credit card, and we also cancelled a credit card we didn't really need.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess you have to be a bit careful with this one and be honest with yourself. If you're someone that you're not quite sure if you could use them wisely, maybe it's a good idea to steer clear of this one. But this has been a really cool one for me.
That's cool. I have heard a lot of people, I was always like vehemently against credit cards when I was younger, just because like I didn't really trust myself so much with it. But when I started learning when I got a bit older about the benefits of how you can use it, and you have your, depending on different banks, right, and credit card providers, it's either a 30 or a 45-day interest-free period. So it means you can kind of spend that money. And again, I would keep very small, like if I was to do this, or you'd keep a very small, maybe a couple of grand, that for 30 days, you literally can it's just your living expenses, and you're gonna spend it anyway, but you can pay it on that. It's interest-free. Pay it off before the due date is the absolutely key thing. It can help a little bit from the serviceability perspective, because it's showing an ability to borrow and pay back on time and everything as well. So it does help with the credit score over time. But it can be a great way to not like have those, you can kind of save that extra money in your high interest savings account, earn the interest on it, while this other expense is going through interest free, and then you're paying it off before that cutoff date, but you've made the extra interest on your money. So it's it's one of those little ones, especially can help those first timers and whatnot. But it's always been a good one. A lot of people have talked about that. It's like over the years, but it's funny, I don't really hear about it that much anymore. No one talks about it so much, but I think it's one of those things, if you use it wisely and you do it properly, I think it can be a really powerful little additional strategy within the, which is what we're talking about, right? These little hacks as you go through. So
Yeah.
that's cool. I like your 3 hacks. They're good.
Oh, thank you so much. Do you have any hacks you wanted to share?
Probably my biggest one on the reverse side of that would be when you start accumulating property, start utilizing an offset or a redraw properly, because your high interest savings accounts, they're normally quite good, but your interest that a home loan will almost always be more. So if you would use it for the first one, but then swap it up to the offset or redraw account after, because I find that is really powerful. So anyone that's a couple of properties in, or maybe you're about to buy your first one, that would be the idea to swap it over, because interest is calculated daily. So the more that you have in that account, you're working off that account as well. The less interest you're paying, or it might be the more principal you're paying on that front as well, as opposed to interest. It can be a really good way to kind of repay debt quicker, or just pay less interest on that front as well. So that's a cool one. But I think I guess if we're going to round out the 5, my other one would be just be brutally honest with yourself. If save what you can save, you know what I mean? Like, especially if you're trying to get into your first deal, it's as Queenie says there, if you've got the ability to flip it and do 30 of savings instead of 20, if you're able to do it and you're fully committed to this thing, don't come up with excuses as to how to save less, or don't fall less than the 20% as a minimum that she's sort of saying here as well. Stick to your guns with this stuff, because it's going to pay off. Property is such a compounding asset. The sooner you get into it in the right locations, the faster you're going to get to your next deposit, because you're going to be able to pull that out of equity. So work really hard towards that first savings, that first deposit, and then that's going to be the game changer as long as you buy the right property in the right location at the right price.
I love it. Yeah, offsets are so good, because also offsets, they don't tax you on like how much you're saving, because essentially you're saving interest. You're not earning interest.
Instead of paying it.
So when you get interest from a high interest savings account, you're taxed on that interest at the end of the financial year. So it's like even better than a high interest savings account in a lot of cases. And I also love the other one too. It's very true. It's sometimes you do need to make sacrifices, but there's this crazy stat, like the first 100,000 is always the hardest to achieve. It takes such a long time. But then once you reach that milestone, once you get your first place or get your foot in the door, get your first investment property or your first home or whatever it is, it's just crazy how much your wealth can compound. But I think the key is also like starting early, being able to get there early, and then you can kind of like ease up a little bit, have a bit more fun,
What I think the thing is as well though, is like 100, it took you guys 4 years to save the 100, yeah? Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I know with me and with a lot of other people I've worked with before, but I'd love to know about you and Pablo as well, is when you got to that 100,000 though, because you'd been doing it for 4 years, did it just make you frugal? Like it made you have a frugal mentality because you've been doing it for so long anyway?
Yeah, it really
didn't like
did.
all of a sudden flip and it's like, oh, we bought the first place, now we'll go spend. That's like almost like your psyche. It's like almost like rewires the brain, yeah?
It really does. Yeah, I feel like it does rewire your psyche, which I think is a good thing, but nowadays I feel like I'm a lot more like easygoing with money, like I'll definitely, if I feel like a coffee one day, I'll do it. But back in the early days, I would literally like
Did
go
you
to
script
my...
that hard, really?
Yeah,
That's cool.
I literally would go out with my friends for lunch and I just would not buy lunch. I would just sit there and it was really sad.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I guess it teaches you things and it makes you more appreciative of things. But yeah, it's so nice not to have to like live in that survival mode anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first 100,000, it's always the hardest.
It is.
Takes the longest, but it gets so much easier, doesn't it? Don't you think?
100%.
It's so much easier.
It's so much easier. And I think, one of the key things I've ever learnt especially in property, as long as you buy the right property, is the first deposit's always the hardest. Always the hardest. But if you buy that right deal, it becomes so easy after that. I wouldn't say so easy, but like the savings component of, you don't need to save another 60, 80, $100,000 for your next deal, because you bought the right property, right location, right price. It will do the heavy lifting for you to give that deposit back to get going. And that's why I talk about like, being hardlined with this and having, whatever you set as a parameter or a goal, have that as a minimum and hit it every single week, every single month. Because as soon as you get into that first deal, then it starts to compound. Then the snowball effect. I talk about snowball effect all the time, right? It's you work so hard at this thing, you get in there, and then it starts to pick up. And then, all right, the first deal might have taken you 2 years to get into. The second one takes 1, and then it's every 6 months. And all of a sudden, this portfolio is snowballing and turning into a beast. So, yeah, I love it on that front.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It's so nice to make money without necessarily working for it, which is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the intelligent way, right?
Yeah.
I got a final thing for you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. But the last thing that I wanted to ask you was travel hacks. I know you got a few things here. I'm a big travel fiend. I love it. A lot of our clients are, and our listeners are as well. People who have heard this whole thing and they're like, but I still want to go on my Bali trip, or I want to do something on a budget or whatever, and they still want to be able to live that little bit as you go through as well. Talk me through your key travel hacks. I don't care how many you give me, but like your key travel hacks that people would still be able to enjoy to an extent as they go through this heavy, or this initial acquisition process. What would your key travel hacks be? Because obviously you just told us you flew the whole way around the world in business class, literally off points and everything. Run us through, your key travel hacks to be able to still have a bit of fun on the side.
Yeah, I love traveling and love travel hacks, so I'm glad you asked. So yeah, first one, using credit cards wisely has been such a game changer.
Cool.
If you don't have points yet, or you're not really looking to go down that path, another really cool one is Google Flights has this you just go on the Google Flights website, put in your location, don't put in a destination, and then just put how long you'd like to travel for. So say like a week. And then Google Flights will bring up this like map of like all of the possible destinations you can go and how much it costs. And like the cheapest kind of like prices that you can get. It's actually really, really cool.
So
if you don't know where,
that.
yeah, it's really cool. So if you don't know where you want to go, but you want to go somewhere this year for a week, it's a really cool place to get inspiration. And then you can also work out, okay, what it only costs like $800 to fly, 8 hours to a new country, or like maybe there are some cheap flights to Europe you could get, or Bali, or wherever. It's a good one to get inspiration.
That's really cool. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
Okay, so Google Flights, and then you kind of put in the dates, and then it'll just bring up, and you can just search kind of like cheapest to most expensive. That's sick. I love that.
Yeah. Another one would be if you're traveling in Europe, they have these really good laws if your flight is delayed or cancelled. And if your flight is delayed or cancelled by more than 3 hours, you can actually get up to 150 euros to 350 euros back in compensation. But the airlines don't advertise it openly because obviously, like, why would they? But I was in Finland a couple of years ago, and my flight was delayed by more than 3 hours. And I just went onto the website, applied online, and, put in the flight, that it was delayed, whatever. And I got 150 euros back from the airline.
That's mad.
It's crazy.
So what you just got? So all of them have like this online section in their portal that you can kind of log in and submit it.
So it's like this special kind of like if you search, it's like if you just search like European flight delayed, and then you just submit a thing online. So any country in Europe,
so cool.
even if you're traveling from outside Europe into Europe, as long as it's happening in Europe, they have these really good laws. And
I wish I knew that, because like it was 2 years ago, Morgs, my partner, and I, we were flying back from Rome, and our flight got cancelled on the morning. Like the line was 200 people long for this flight home, and they said bird strike or something had sort of shut this flight down, and it ended up taking us an extra 2 days to go home. It was ridiculous because they couldn't get anything. This was like just as COVID had kind of eased up, and it was like that first European summer after it had eased up. And I didn't know, and that they didn't offer us any sort of compensation. I didn't know there was some little platform that you could kind of jump in there, and that's cool. So it's like a mandatory thing that they have to do it.
They do.
They certainly were not advertising that.
I know.
Think we got a sandwich and a bottle of water, I think, for about 8 hours. That was about the extent of it. So
that's what they usually do. They'll usually give you like vouchers. I think at the time we got like a $20 voucher in the airport. Yeah. But they're supposed to give you a lot more than
that. Goes quick at the airport.
Yeah,
that goes real quick.
It really does. It really does. And one more I would say is just knowing insurance, like when it comes to travel insurance, or if you have a credit card and your credit card has insurance, like some of the insurance policies are actually pretty good. So there are some credit cards where you can get free rental car insurance. So that's definitely helped us out a few times. I actually know this lady, and she was traveling in Europe, and the diamond fell out of her engagement ring somewhere in Europe.
No way.
And so she submitted a claim through her Amex insurance, and they actually paid for her diamond to be fixed.
Way.
So it was like $5,000, which is just
crazy.
So if something happens on your trip, laptop breaks, whatever, have a look at your travel insurance and see if there's you know, any sort of compensation that you can get from it.
From that side. And so you're saying that a lot of some of the credit card providers that you could do, even say for like your little $1,000, $2,000 monthly spend that you're going to do, and you're going to pay this thing off every month if you're going to do this, guys. But so you're saying they can do that and there's a travel insurance. Is it like an affordable sort of add-on sort of thing, or does it come with the credit card?
It comes with the credit card.
Really?
Yeah. So if you book your flights with the credit card or hotels or any sort of part of your trip with the credit card, you'll often get travel insurance, depending on which card you have.
It is, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but yeah, it's pretty good. Travel insurance.
I need to start using that thing.
I know,
Probably,
yeah.
That's mad.
It's really cool.
How good. Okay, awesome. Well, Queenie, thank you so much for joining us on the potty. I know a lot of people would have taken some great value out of this thing. We always talk about investing and going hard and all the rest, but sometimes like the savings, and I love that bit around like negotiating the salaries and whatnot as well, because we even talk about it occasionally, but I just say, just go up and do it. I love the ideas of like planting the seeds and whatnot as well. Some really cool stuff in that. So thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. It was so much fun chatting with you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Listeners, I hope you took some great value out of it. As always, if you did take some great value, make sure you send it on to someone else that might also enjoy this thing and take some good little tips out of it. Like we said, with the savings or negotiating on your salaries, all those different things. There was a lot of gold in this episode as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you're not following us yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button on your favorite listening platform. And once again, guys, that is us all wrapped up on the Scouting Australia podcast.